So the situation in eastern Ukraine is still developing, and as of now, it's looking to be the most significant breach of the Ukrainian lines in months, if not years. That said, there is more that we don't know right now than we do. So take any assessments around Pokrovsk and this possible breakthrough with a grain of salt. There is no consensus on the Russian side, the Ukrainian side, or with American or European analysts about exactly what is playing out here. This is one of the murkier situations we've seen so far in this war. And it's, adding to that murkiness is the incredible Russian operational security, which is surprising. Normally, they're bragging about any sort of possible movement through the lines. Right now, they are almost exclusively citing Ukrainian sources, so we have little to no insight from the Russian perspective. Now, my video earlier today was focused on a situation update near the front. I still stand by that. I think that information still holds true to the best of our knowledge about how far Russian forces have pushed into Ukrainian territory, the general location of forces. Now, we have, over the course of the day, learned more about the tactics employed by both Ukraine and Russia, so that's what we're getting into in today's video, how and why this operation played out the way it did. Also, we've got President Zelensky, this will be in the back half of today's video, saying that if Ukraine is forced to give up Donetsk, the area that they're fighting over here around Pokrovsk, it's just setting the stage for a third war with Russia. Now, starting out with an assessment here from Rob Lee, a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, whose information will be linked in the description below, as is the case with every analyst quoted in today's video. He says the front line is actually relatively porous. In fact, I should pull up a map here so we can see the area we're looking at. Deep state map, using this for a lot of reasons, but right now it is the only one that's actually showing this significant Russian advance north of Pokrovsk, which are these two prongs here. Going to the satellite version today, I tend to use the standard version. I think it's a little easier to use, but I had some requests for this, so we're going to try it out to show how quickly this expanded just in the course of the last 2 weeks, 12 days. You can see how much territory possibly Russia has taken. That's one of the things that's being contested a little bit in some of these assessments, is whether or not Russia actually controls this and how easy or hard it might be for Ukraine to push back and reclaim some of this area. Rob Lee says the front line is actually relatively porous, and there's often fewer than 10 soldiers defending every kilometer of the front, depending on the terrain. Many Ukrainian brigades have adopted a different approach to defense, where their infantry deliberately try to avoid engaging Russian infantry unless absolutely necessary. They instead rely on drones to stop Russian infantry, both in front of or behind the front line. Most commanders we spoke to, and Rob has been on multiple trips to Ukraine, estimated that 80 to 90% of Russian infantry casualties are caused by drones. That does seem to line up with a lot of the footage we're seeing out of this war. And something I want you to keep in mind as we continue the assessment here from Rob Lee, this is a big difference from how Russian offensive operations were playing out earlier in the war, where they were sending small detachments, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individuals, forward to kind of flesh out the Ukrainian positions, forcing those machine guns to open fire, and then Russia would know which areas to attack. What we're seeing right now is the Ukrainian response to that. They said, well, we don't want to do that again, and here's why. Lee says, quote, they've adopted this approach in part because Russia has improved its targeting process at the tactical level. If Ukrainian infantry engage Russian infantry, their positions will then be destroyed by FPVs, bomber drones, artillery, or glide bombs. Any fixed position above ground can be destroyed with successive drone strikes, so almost all defensive positions along the front line are in tree lines, forests, or the basements of houses or buildings. In some cases, Russian forces would previously advance by using infantry to draw fire and then destroy the frontline positions with fires. So you're watching in real time these two sides adapt to situations at the front. We see that day in and day out with how rapidly tactics are changing. But in this case, Ukraine has relatively limited forces spread out across the front. So when they see Russian soldiers moving forward, they do everything they can to eliminate it with a drone where the Russians aren't necessarily able to strike back, rather than opening fire. And I understand armchair quarterback sitting here thousands of miles away, it's easy for everybody to say, well, actually, if they did it this way or that way, and I assure you they've probably thought of that. Whether it's the suppressors on the weapon systems or any number of things to prevent their location from being given away. When that position is identified, it's just completely destroyed. So you lose eyes and ears, and the soldiers, as in eyes and ears to monitor the battlefield, and then the soldiers that are capable of fighting at that position. So they are sometimes even letting the Russian soldiers through their lines, quote, because not all these positions are necessarily manned, and then striking them with drones once they're behind the position. It's not at all what I think most people are thinking of when you look at a map like this and you see the front lines, and we see pictures and videos of soldiers on both sides in trench lines. And it's just a little more complicated than that. Now, turning to a Russian source here, Milinfo Live actually did provide a bit of an assessment from their perspective as to what this looks like right now. He's saying it's a pipe, but without the pipe. This very tactic of infiltration looks like allowing Russian assault troops to make deep breakthroughs near Pokrovsk. The pipe without a pipe is kind of referring to the operations up near Sudza in Kursk a few months ago, when Russian soldiers infiltrated behind Ukrainian lines through that underground abandoned pipe. They popped up, kind of surprised Ukrainian forces, and that was kind of a spark for what would be the eventual pushing of Ukrainian forces out of Kursk. He says, in recent days, the Pokrovsk direction has become a key pain point for the enemy. But how did this become possible? Drones have changed the battlefield beyond recognition, turning practically every kilometer into an observable and targetable zone. This has almost nullified the possibility of rapid mechanized breakthroughs with masses of equipment, turning the offensive into a gradual, bloody grind, gnawing away at every 100 meters from the enemy. This situation forced the Russian command and officers on the ground to look for alternative ways to advance forward with an exit to the rear of the Ukrainian armed forces. In Sudza and Avdiivka, for such operations, pipes happened to be on the terrain that were successfully used, through which infantry secretly accumulated behind enemy lines and then delivered a surprise strike. He says he kind of laments that you can't use pipes that aren't there, as in you can't dig new pipes around Pokrovsk and use it like you did in some of those areas. You got to find different areas, or different tactics. He says, and now near Pokrovsk, a similar tactic is being used, only the infantry infiltrates the rear of the Ukrainian defense, not through pipes, but in small groups along pre-planned routes through fields and groves. According to enemy reports, the Russian armed forces, taking advantage of gaps in the Ukrainian defense, methodically move groups of several people at night. Infantry groups are guided by radio communication from drones, often using thermal camouflage cloaks to hide from Ukrainian reconnaissance copters. I'll play a video here of some of those thermal cloaks. It's one of those things where it's better than nothing, but you wouldn't want to bet your life on this. Like it can work, and it's better than just standing out there in the open, but it has to be used very, very well and in a very specific manner to actually not be seen. But either way, if you're not looking for this, it does have the possibility of kind of helping you blend in with the night, and that appears to be what the Russians have done here. They say, as a result, as soon as a sufficient number of people accumulate in a certain place, they carry out raids on rear areas, set ambushes on equipment along roads, secure previously safe settlements for the enemy, creating the illusion of large operating forces. Besides the direct damage to the Ukrainian military, such actions cause panic, forcing the enemy to look for bypass routes and to see saboteurs everywhere. And I should note, this is why a lot of the footage that we're seeing come out of the war right now is individual soldiers, 1, 2, 3, 4 soldiers at a time. It has been a while since we've had videos or pictures showing even platoon-size elements. Let's call it 20. That's a small platoon. We haven't seen that in a long time. It's been a while since we've seen even 3, 4 armored vehicles moving at the same time. It is always, and if you look through some of the Ukrainian drone footage, especially because it's the Russians on the assault and the Ukrainians trying to stop them, you look through a lot of that Ukrainian drone footage over and over and over and over again. It is individual Russian soldiers out there trying to move forward or trying to move around. This is why. When they're exposed, when they're not in defensive positions, it's this small-scale infiltration type tactic. Milinfo Live continues saying, however, such infiltration operations do carry serious risks. All supplies to infantry groups far from the front line are carried out exclusively by aerial drone. And we'll pull up the map here to see the area now that Russia has to resupply their forces. It already would have been a bit of a challenge to get resupplies up to this area north of Pokrovsk. We've seen videos of some of the supply routes to the south. They are just constant targets from Ukrainian drones, like roads of death, no doubt. So even resupplying this area here, northeast of Verdinsky, would have been a challenge. But as we mentioned in the previous video today, moving up here through some of these narrow strips, even more challenging. Think of how easy it would be for Russian drones to focus, say, on just this one stretch, and maybe, nothing's coming up by road. And if they have the counter drone measures in place, it's not that crazy to think they could cut off this Russian element here. Millinfo Live says, if something goes wrong and the main force cannot support the assault troops operated in isolation, the enemy can crush their positions with a counterstrike. Therefore, in the near future, an attack by the main Russian forces should be expected. But if the whole plan succeeds and is implemented as intended, it means the collapse of the Ukrainian defense in Pokrovsk and the Dnipropetrovsk regions. But for now, it is better to not jump ahead. That tends to be a theme on Russian channels right now, saying, hold up, we're not entirely sure of what exactly is playing out here. Now, in terms of the counterattack or the possibility of a counterattack against the Russian forces here, we do know that already Ukraine has redeployed at least 3 units. We've seen the movement of the 92nd Assault Brigade from the Kharkiv front. They're joining the 4th National Guard Rubizh Brigade, and then the 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov of the National Guard of Ukraine. And speaking of timing, we actually just kicked off a fundraiser earlier today to help the International Battalion of the 12th Special Forces Brigade. We're helping them pick up some night vision, some thermals, some communications equipment, drones, and quite a bit more. The last I checked, that fundraiser's only been up for like 2 hours or something. We already had $5,000 because you all are incredible people. These are guys that are heading directly into the fight. These are foreign volunteers, a lot of Americans, Brits, and others that have volunteered to go over here and stand side by side with their Ukrainian brothers in arms and take the fight to the Russians to try to defend their territory. That is who we're supporting in this fundraiser. Incredible group of people that are doing their absolute best day in and day out. We've teamed up with Zynga's Paw. I can't say enough nice things about this organization, probably the most transparent fundraising organization I've ever worked with, and they were nice enough to work the administration and logistics on this one. So all information in the description below, as well as the pinned comment. If interested and able, please consider contributing. It means the world to me and to the guys likely right now headed into the fight. Now, looking at this situation here, there were some reports earlier today of a possible counterattack, and I think that might have been taken out of context. A lot of it was sourced from a Ukrainian that goes by call sign Bakhmut Demon on Telegram, and this is a good account to follow. I'll link them in the description below because they're very they're not rosy-eyed. They're very pragmatic in laying out the situation, very realistic in what is playing out. And earlier they said, quote, "Look, the situation is bad. I'm telling it like it is. We're trying to do everything we can, trying to stabilize." And I should mention right now they're in or near Pokrovsk. Then later today they said, quote, "We destroyed several groups of assholes who made a breakthrough, gradually pushing back the assholes who tried to establish themselves." And we have no footage of this. The way that this was being interpreted that I could see on some channels was that there had been a counterattack that had begun and Russia had been pushed back from a lot of these different areas. Maybe. I think that's a bit of a liberal reading of the information we have here. What we know based off of a couple different sources is that no doubt a lot of the Russians in this area are isolated. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe at most. We have seen in other areas of Pokrovsk recently that Ukraine has deployed kind of counter-sabotage groups to hunt down and eliminate these Russians. That is what this sounds like to me, is that some of the Russians that were up here were found and were killed. I don't know that I would go so far quite yet to say that there was some significant or planned counterattack. It's a little bit early to assume that is what played out. Right now, we're still in a situation where Ukraine is adapting and kind of trying to close up ranks to make sure that the Russian forces can't push any further. Now, continuing on with some of Rob Lee's assessment here, he says that the Ukrainian infantry continue to hold their positions and other units can mop up these groups, then this, what you're seeing on the screen right here, would not be a breakthrough. He says these groups don't necessarily demonstrate an increase in Russian territorial control, but they could create problems in the rear. Deep infiltration will also cause Ukrainian units to employ great force protection measures, and they may have to push back certain supporting assets further from the front line, including drone teams, making it more difficult to defend. More broadly, Ukraine will need to focus more on quick reaction forces that are trained to counter sabotage groups, given the lack of infantry holding the front. So couple things. It is going to push. We're already seeing a disruption to logistics, likely a disruption to drone operations. My understanding is there were at least a few artillery positions in here that are now out of commission because of this move. And what Lee is getting at there is you can't just grab some infantry and say, hey, go move through this area and try to find sabotage groups in, say, this red area, because they don't know where they are. And they might even be moving further west or north or south. So it's a special skill set, a dedicated unit that needs to be employed in there. We have seen that in recent weeks with some GUR units operating in Pokrovsk, specifically hunting down some of these, we're calling them sabotage groups, infiltrators, more than anything. So that exists. Does it exist in enough numbers to really be put to solid use up here? We'll see. Now, turning to a European assessment here, Emil Castahelmi of the Blackbird Group, he said, quote, to break through and actually cause a more serious collapse in Ukrainian defenses, Russia would need to commit a mechanized echelon to exploit the initial success. As long as Ukraine prevents this, the armed forces of Ukraine has a good chance of regaining control of the situation. My only pushback there was, let's not hang too much on the idea that it has to be an armored column moving through. I think I agree with the general gist that it has to be a lot more. You'd have to have a sizable element moving through here and establishing control over this area. Like the Russian Milinfo Live was saying, right now it's all drone-dropped supplies to keep these guys alive for the time being. Let's not wait until a tank moves through here to say Russia now has control. I think that you could probably say the same thing with, honestly, even motorcycles, ATVs, or pickup trucks. He says Russia needs to solidify captured positions and widen the flanks of the current breach in order to bring heavier equipment and support weapons in. As the spearhead operates in relatively deep, supporting and supplying the infiltration groups can soon become an issue. The situation should be resolvable with a successful counterattack if the Ukrainians manage to gather enough reserves in the area before the Russians gain a stronger hold on the newly gained positions. It is, however, uncertain if the Ukrainians can actually do it, which, I think stepping back, this is probably going to be a very significant next 24 to 72 hours to see how the next few months, or not to be overdramatic, but maybe the entire course of this war goes. If Ukraine is able to move forces in here, successfully counterattack, cut this off, or at least stop it, we're kind of back to where we were before this began, and Ukraine is going to have to find a way to make sure this doesn't happen anywhere else along the front. If they're unable to stop it and Russia is able to advance further and kind of reinforce this area, now all of a sudden you're talking about the possibility of their moving on to other areas in Donetsk. And the timing here is critical. We have 3 days until President Trump meets with President Putin in Alaska. One of Putin's asks is all of Donetsk. If Russia is continuing to advance at a pretty rapid clip, I have a feeling that President Trump is going to see this, or his close advisors will look at this and say, hey, it makes sense to hand it over rather than continually fall back within this territory. So the timing here is very, very important. Now, turning over to some pretty interesting statements here from President Zelensky amidst all of this. He had an interview with some journalists earlier today where he said that to give eastern Ukraine to Russia, it would just be opening the door for a third war. Quote, for the Russians, Donbass is a springboard for a new future offensive. If we leave Donbass on our own accord or under pressure, we will start a third war. I'm not going to surrender my country because I have no right to do so. If we leave Donbass today, our fortifications, our terrain, the heights we control, we will clearly open a bridgehead for the preparation of the Russian offensive. Let me actually go back to the map here for anybody not familiar with the Donbass region. I'm going back to the coloring of the map that I like. So when you look at Ukrainian-controlled territory here, tan and green, you've got Luhansk up here northeast. A little bit to the southwest is Donetsk. This area, those two oblasts, Luhansk and Donetsk, are what make up the Donbass. So when Zelensky is talking about ceding his territory, really it's this area in here that Russia has been trying to take for 3 years now and has not yet accomplished. Zelensky continued by saying, I haven't heard anything, not a single proposal that would guarantee that a new war won't start tomorrow and that Putin won't try to occupy at least the Dnipro, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. So again, zooming out a little bit, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, Kherson. And that is the concern. That's the argument that I think is most valid, is ceding anything to Russia. It just opens the door for further attacks. There are a lot of defensive positions up here throughout northern Donetsk that giving that to Russia makes further advances on their part that much easier. Now, For what it's worth, we're seeing a little bit of some commentary to that end by senior officials here in the United States. Senator Lindsey Graham kind of had some ideas of President Trump needs to be strong and hold the line and make sure that another war doesn't happen. And that's the focus here. I've had a lot of close friends ask recently about Ukraine retaking all of this territory, and I've tried to tell them that has not been a focus of Ukraine's diplomacy in recent months at all. It's been a long time since we've heard Ukraine will retake Crimea or even portions of the Donbass. It is a just and lasting peace to make sure this does not spiral into another war. That is priority number one. And fortunately, we are seeing some in the U.S. that I think understand that and hopefully are pushing President Trump ahead of his meeting with Putin this Friday. Here's Senator Lindsey Graham kind of getting into some of that. That guy makes me nervous. He's back and forth on so many different issues, but here's Senator Graham.
Well, I think what we want to do is make sure there's no third invasion, that President Trump not only ends the war now, but he ends it forever. The word don't, I would provide to President Trump, don't do what Biden and Obama did. Not be clear to Putin. You're not there to humiliate Russia. You're there to end the war. There will be land swaps. Ukraine cannot evict every Russian soldier, and Russia is not going to take Kyiv. It's time for this war to end honorably and justly. But what would a good deal look like? Keep helping the Ukrainian military sell weapons to Europe to help Ukraine. That's good for our economy, and that's a form of deterrence. President Trump negotiated a hundreds of billions of dollars deal, over $1 trillion of critical minerals to be mined in Ukraine. We get half of it. Set up American business interests in Ukraine. That's a form of deterrence. Have the Europeans guarantee Ukraine's security, and if Putin invades again, he'll be fighting the coalition of the willing, just not Ukraine. And a guy like me can help too. I will create pre-invasion sanctions that will crush Russia if there's a third invasion. All of this together would prevent a third invasion. It would end the war honorably and justly, and China is watching.
All right, so there is some positive to take away from that. We covered President Trump's press conference a couple days ago that was wild in so many different ways, but I do like some of the things we're hearing there from Senator Graham. Unfortunately, as I mentioned a minute ago, he tends to change up where he stands on things a lot. Generally speaking, he's been pretty hawkish in terms of pushing back against Russia, but also pragmatic in the sense of he's not going to advocate for U.S. boots on the ground or direct NATO intervention. So what he's laying out here is a possible solution. To make sure another war doesn't happen, keep selling weapons. I've harped on that for so long. It's for us, I don't know, maybe Senator Graham watches, right? That could be a thing. The idea that we sell weapons, the United States makes money, and we can we provide the weaponry. As how much do you want? How many artillery rounds do you want? How many javelins? Let's ramp it up here in the United States. That's right up President Trump's alley, and hopefully that is a message he's hearing. And then the pushing of the coalition of the willing. There's still quite a ways for Europe to go before that's a real thing, but the talk is there. Maybe the walk will follow. The idea of a genuine security guarantee, it's not NATO, but a genuine security guarantee of if Russia pushes any further in any direction, they are not just facing down Ukraine, but 3, 4, 5 European countries ready to put Russia in their spot. Maybe Putin doesn't roll the dice in that situation. But nonetheless, that's all we got for now. I thought it was worth diving into a bit of a tactical look of how this most recent fight is playing out. Again, we've got the fundraiser ongoing right now for the international battalion. The guys getting ready to head over there, or maybe even in there right now, starting to push back some of these Russian forces. If interested and able, that link is in the description below. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your consideration and your generosity with these fundraisers. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.